Hi, this is Paul J. Bennett again here for another Facebook Live. This is going to be a relatively short one, and I picked for the topic religion in fantasy stories. So, people, being people, regardless of whether they're in a real world or a fantasy world, tend to have a belief system. In our own history, religion evolved to explain where the world came from and so on. That's not to say you can't have characters that aren't religious, but certainly most societies have some form of belief system. So before I get started on my own world, I thought I would mention just a couple that you may or may not be familiar with. Anyone who's read Robert E. Howard, the Conan series, is familiar with the idea of Crom, because he's always saying, "By Crom." It's almost to the point where it's a little on the silly side. But that's the age that it was written in, right? You have to remember the time period in which these stories were written. One of my favorite takes on, in a sort of a comedic sense, on religion is a Fafhrd the Gray Mouser story. Now, these were stories written by Fritz Leiber, and one of them is quite funny. It's called Isaac of the Jug, and it involves, I think that's the name of the story anyway, it involves Fafhrd, who is a large, typical sort of barbarian character, and the Gray Mouser is more of a sleek, small city thief type of character. And Isaac of the Jug is a god who was tortured on the rack and suffered as a result of this. And so Fafhrd, the huge barbarian, essentially gets drunk. For some reason, they tie him to the bed. In his rage, he gets loose and he's wandering all over the place, and they think he's the reincarnation of Isaac of the Jug. So it's a fairly funny story, actually. And I'm not saying that, I'm not suggesting that you mock a religion, for example. These are obviously not real religions. But it was an entertaining tale, and it does give a different twist on things. If we move on to, probably everyone's heard of Lord of the Rings, although some of you may only be familiar from the movie perspective. In Lord of the Rings, Tolkien actually developed quite an extensive creation myth about how the world was created, and he named all the gods. But this doesn't really come to light unless you read the Silmarillion, which was published either posthumously or just before he died, I forget which. It was edited by his son Christopher Tolkien. And it goes into great detail. Now, that's not to say that the people that live in the world are familiar with all of these stories. In fact, Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit really don't delve into religion at all. That's not to say that the characters themselves aren't religious, but it doesn't come into play in the story itself. So there are some stories that are more allegorical. C.S. Lewis, the Narnia series, for example, has a lot of Christian algorithms in it, or not algorithms, sorry, references in it. To Christianity. C.S. Lewis was, I can't remember if he was Catholic, but he was a very religious, deeply religious person. And so if you know where to look, you can see signs of that in that series, which of course is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and so on, the Narnia tales. In my own books, I started off actually not having religion. That didn't really work. There has to be somebody there. And so I came up with a concept of what I now refer to as the old gods. These are the gods that were worshipped by the original human ancestors. And actually, if you delve into the stories, not just the human ancestors, orcs and elves originally worshipped these gods as well. Now, it's never explicitly stated whether in this world the gods exist or not, but certainly people believe they exist, although an often repeated term is that the gods don't interfere in mortal matters. So you're not going to see a thunderbolt from the sky like in the Greek gods who were interfering in life all the time, for example. And that was a conscious decision. But religion does play an important part, and especially for things like coronations, for example, weddings, obviously there's going to be an effect there. When I started talking about the rest of the world outside of Merceria, I wanted to do something a little different. Just having a god with a different name wasn't all that interesting to me. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I wanted to explore some different potential things. So first of all, actually, before I mention that, I should also point out that in the world of Merceria, they all believe in multiple gods, but each country sort of has its own patron god. So Saxnor, of course, the god of strength, is who they worship in Merceria, but they're well aware of other gods like Bundar, who's the god of thunder, and Malin, the goddess of wisdom, and so on. And of course, in Welwyn, their patron saint, or pardon me, patron god or goddess in this case, is Malin, goddess of wisdom. Moving to the continent, I thought it would be interesting to have a religion based on something quite a bit different. And so I came up with this concept of having saints. So, of course, we have saints in Protestant and Catholic religions, of course, or similar things in other religions, although the term saint might not be used. In this case, the term saint is used to refer to a person who has taken on holy-like qualities because of their actions in life. Sort of like an epitome of a human characteristic. Now, the saints existed about, I think it's 1,000, well, depending on the book, of course, about 1,100 years prior to Ashes, for example. And they were 6 unique individuals that banded together in the holy city of Harani. Now, Harani is reported to be the birthplace of humanity. So humans believe that that is where the humans first appeared. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that's true, but from their perspective, it's true. That's their belief system. I actually have more than one creation myth. I have how it's explained with the gods and how it's explained with the saints and so on, but of course, people worship what they worship, and they don't necessarily know what the truth of the matter is in this case. They know what has been developed over those years. This would be sort of like, I have in my mind the idea of the lost writings, if you will. We know for example, in Christian religion, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls and other scrolls that didn't make it into the Bible. These are sort of lost nuggets of knowledge. So I had something similar to that. Now, with the saints, there are 6 distinct saints. A couple of those are sort of internal to the church and not things that you run across every day. If you want to see more detail about that, then of course you can go to the website. And the newsletter actually has had articles on the various saints and their origins and so on. Now, the last one I have is the concept of ancestor worship. So this is explored in more detail concerning the orcs of the realm in any location, because of course the orcs have a lot of spiritual magic. They have life mages that can literally communicate with the souls of the departed, or spirits, or whatever you want to call them. It's actually referred to as spirit magic. So these ancestors aren't all-powerful people, or gods, or whatever you want to call them. They're actually orcs that lived potentially thousands of years ago, or hundreds of years ago, or even in some cases recently departed. And they act as a wellspring of knowledge. It would be like communicating to older people that have had life experience, and then they can offer their guidance and so on. And so that's explored to a certain extent in Ashes, in the sequel to Ashes, which is coming out in January, which is called Embers, by the way. That's explored in a bit more detail. You find out a bit more about how these spirits work and how communion with the spirits actually works. You see a little bit of flavor in that in the Mercerian stories as well, in the Heir to the Crown series, but you'd have to get to the later books to really see that. And of course, we have the orc shaman that works with the Mercerians, Kraylock. Make sure I got the right name. I got so many orcs that I have. Yeah, Kraylock. And he is a life mage, and he can communicate with spirits. The orcs also use the same magic to communicate over great distances. So I wanted to have something in there that was a little bit different than what we had, or what I've done in previous books. Now, the saints actually, if you've been reading the Heir to the Crown series, the saints are actually mentioned earlier as early, in fact, as I believe Heir to the Crown was the first mention. It might be the one afterwards, because the Carathians worship the saints. And so there's kind of an ongoing friendly argument between Gerald and Lanaka, who's one of the Carathian leaders, about which god is stronger, does he have a beard, and so on. And of course he has to remind Gerald that he's not a god, he's a man. That's what the saints are, they're human. So I found that was very useful to work up. Now, in addition, if you're going to have a religion, different people have different opinions about religion. Some people are deeply religious. Some people are hardly religious at all. Some people just don't believe in religion. And in a fantasy world, there's nothing that says you can't have the same thing. In the Mercerian stories, religion is kind of there. It's, you kind of get the feeling that they're like, oh yeah, we go to church when we're supposed to, but we're not really deeply convinced of this, the existence of the gods, or we don't go out of our way to worship them, at least for the main characters. In Ashes, however, you get to meet a very religious person, Brother Cyric, who's a temple knight actually, a brother of St. Matthew, and of course, naturally, working for a religious order, he's going to be deeply religious. His origin, I've already got a couple of stories involving Cyric that will be appearing at some point in the future. I won't throw out any dates, I don't think we have any dates for it at the moment. And he begins life as a lay brother of the order, so he's just like a monk, essentially, and then he eventually becomes a temple knight. So I didn't want to use the term Templar because, well, people hear Templar and they think the real Templars, the order that was established by the Catholic Church. And so they're kind of modeled on that in a sense. They are religious warriors, but there's quite a few significant differences. And of course, his order in particular bears maybe more than a passing resemblance to the Templars, because the Templar order itself was dedicated to protect people visiting the Holy Land. The Temple Knights of St. Matthew are there to help the poor and the sick, so it's similar in a certain respect. In order to do that for Cyric, I had to come up with the entire organization of the church. I had to figure out who's at the top, how the church is run. I tried to avoid using terms like priest because, people will, if I were to say priest, for example, they might automatically think, oh, Catholic priest, or so on. So I decided to use different names. I used terms prior, archprior, although technically those are, I guess, Christian terms. I think they're different enough from priests that people aren't going to necessarily label them the same way. I also have separate structures for each arm of the church, much as, say, Catholicism has, Benedictine monks and various other types of orders within the church. It operates in the same sort of way. So I took inspiration from those, but hopefully there's enough differences that people aren't going to think it's just a copy of Catholicism. That's certainly not what it was meant to be. And at the same time, just like in the real world, a religion is not in itself a bad thing, but there can be people in any organization of any size who are maybe overzealous, and others that are more devout. And we see that with Cyric. Cyric is a very devout individual. He firmly believes in the tenets of his church, but he has a good nature. He's not evil. If you read Ashes, you'll find there's a couple people who are less saintly, shall we say. I won't give the plot away, but it does revolve around the church to a certain extent, and that's a theme that you're going to see continuing in the rest of the Frozen Flame series. That is the main gist of the series, although there's lots of other plots going on as well. But you're going to see issues within the church, and I kind of like the idea of exploring the, what's the right word, dichotomy of the church as an organization, but having bad people and good people within that organization. So that was a very intentional part, and it propels a lot of that story forward and has an impact on other series that I have in the works as well. One series in particular called Power Ascending, which will come out sometime next year. Got too many other things to catch up on first, so we'll leave that for some point in the future. So if you are writing fantasy, I'm curious to know your opinions on religion in books. We're talking, let's be clear, fictional religions here. I don't want to get into any arguments about religion and whether it's good or bad or anything like that. People are free to have their own opinions, of course, but I don't want it to turn into an argument online. I'm just curious what books you might have read and what religions were mentioned in those books, or if, in fact, religion played a part. There are many fantasy books where religion doesn't seem to play any part whatsoever. So I'd be curious to see what you have to say about things like that. I think that's about all. I'm going to wrap up now. That's about 15 minutes or so, which is about the time I wanted to have. And what I will say is we're going to, doing this every week is a little hard on the schedule here, especially since I'm now literally writing Defender of the Crown. I started the actual text today. So we're going to go to a 2-week or bi-weekly format. So our next one should be in 2 weeks' time, presumably on the Monday. But if that changes, we'll let you know through the newsletter or through the Facebook page and so on. So until next time.
Say hi, Mike.
Oh yeah, I'm supposed to say hi to Mike.
Yes.
Is Mike here?
Yeah.
Oh, there he is. Did Mike say something too? Like he's cut off there.
Oh.
That's the way we've got the window here.
He said, "Hey, Paul."
There he is. So good to see. Good to see you online there. Like I said, we'll do another one of these in about 2 weeks. If you have topics you'd like me to talk about, feel free to email them to me. It's always good to have ideas for future talks. I have a number of things I can talk on. I used to be an instructor at a private college, so I can just talk forever. So, but I'm sure you'd rather see videos about subjects that you're interested in. So if you want to know, writing advice, I'll tell you what I do. I won't tell you that this is the right way. I'll just tell you this is what works for me. Everybody can have their own way of writing. Or if you want to know more about, people's favorite books or movies or whatever, by all means. Speaking of which, we had a posting this week about the new movie on Netflix called The King, about Henry V, which has proved to be quite a lively discussion. And now, because of that, I have to go back and rewatch the Kenneth Branagh version of Henry V. So I have to try to do that when my wife's out, because she doesn't really want to see it, I don't think.
I didn't say that. I said just not 2 days in a row.
Yeah, we did just see the other one, so we'll give it some time before we're ready to see the Kenneth Branagh one. And apparently there's an older Laurence Olivier version, and even one with Tom Hiddleston, which I don't think I didn't even know existed. So that's it for now. Yay. Until next time, happy reading.